In this video, we're going to look at an overview of animal sensory systems. The ability of organisms to survive and thrive in any given environment depends upon their ability to sense changes within that environment and respond to it. Animals can typically detect 5 changes in the environment. These include smell, sound, sight, pressure, and temperature changes. There are special organs within organisms that detect these changes and convey information to the central nervous system. This ability to sense a change in the environment depends on 3 main processes: transduction, meaning the receipt of an external stimulus, and its conversion to an internal signal in the form of an action potential. Second, amplification of the signal. And third, transmission of the signal to the central nervous system. An example of this is given in the image below. Each type of this sensory information or stimulus is detected by a sensory neuron or a sensory receptor, which is a specialized cell that makes a synapse with a sensory neuron. This sensory receptor cell converts the external stimuli, which can be light, sound, tension, or something else, into an electrical signal. So these sensory receptors are located throughout the body and are categorized by the type of stimulus they receive. Some of these types of receptors are nociceptors, which sense harmful stimuli such as tissue injury; thermoreceptors, which detect changes in temperature; mechanoreceptors, which detect distortion caused by pressure; chemoreceptors, which perceive the presence of specific molecules; photoreceptors, which respond to particular wavelengths of light; electroreceptors, which detect electrical fields; and magnetoreceptors, which detect magnetic fields. When cells are in the resting state, the inside of the plasma membrane is more negative than the exterior. If an influx of ions causes the membrane potential to become more positive, then the membrane becomes depolarized. If the reverse happens and the membrane potential becomes more negative than the resting potential, the membrane is said to be hyperpolarized. The change in potential allows different types of stimuli to be transduced to a common type of signal that can be interpreted by the brain. So the signals are converted into a language that the brain can understand and process. If a sensory stimulus induces a large change in a sensory receptor's membrane potential, there is a change in the firing rate of action potentials sent to the brain. The amount of hyperpolarization or depolarization of the sensory receptor is proportional to the intensity of the stimulus. For example, the amount of depolarization that occurs in a sound receptor cell is proportional to the loudness of the sound. As we can see in this second image, if you measure the number of action potentials per second occurring in a louder sound and a softer sound, you will see that there are more action potentials generated when the sound is louder than when it is softer. So the intensity of the sound, the loudness of the sound, is determined based on the number of action potentials generated per second. You can also see that the very low frequencies of sound and very high frequencies of sound do not generate as many action potentials and thus are not registered on our ears. Once these signals are received, this information has to be transmitted to the brain. The receptor cells that receive these signals tend to be highly specific, as we saw earlier. They are specific to the kind of stimuli that they receive, which can be light, sound, pressure, etc. These receptor cells connect to a sensory neuron that sends its signal to a specific portion of the brain. Different regions of the brain are specialized for interpreting the different stimuli. For example, sound is interpreted in the temporal lobes. Sight is interpreted by the occipital lobes at the back of the brain. This brings us to the end of an overview of animal sensory systems. After going through this information, I'd like you to be able to respond to the questions posed on this slide. Thank you.